Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty wild. The story of a forgotten prophet whose ideas from the 1950s perfectly describe the internet world we're all living in right now. So let's dig in and find out who he was and why he was ignored for so long.
So let me start by asking you a question. When you're scrolling through your feed or watching a video, do you think of yourself as just a viewer? Just passively consuming whatever's on the screen?
Because what if you're actually much more than that? What if you're not just watching the show? What if you're part of the show?
I mean, just think about it for a second. We're all doing it, right? We're not just watching, we're out there creating TikToks, we're in the comments on YouTube, we're writing fan fiction, sharing memes, remixing content. We are literally shaping the media landscape in real time.
And yeah, that all feels super modern, doesn't it? Like a total product of the internet age? But here's the kicker. What if the theory that explains all of this wasn't cooked up in some Silicon Valley garage? What if it came from Italy, way back in the 1950s?
All right, it's time to meet our guy, the forgotten prophet, Francesco Fattorello. He was an Italian communications scholar, and let me tell you, his ideas were, well, they were so far ahead of their time it's not even funny.
Okay, so back in the 50s, the thinking was pretty simple. Communication was a one-way street. Information goes from A to B. End of story. But Fattorello came along with this idea he called the communicative relationship. He said, no, the audience isn't some passive sponge just absorbing stuff. He believed the audience was an active partner, someone who actually helps create the meaning of whatever's being communicated.
So you know those old diagrams, sender, arrow, receiver? Fattorello's model was totally different. It was shaped more like a diamond, showing this dynamic, two-way thing happening. It wasn't just about sending a message and hoping it landed. For him, it was about two sides working together to build a shared understanding. It was a relationship, not just a broadcast.
So you're probably thinking, if this guy was so brilliant, why is he the forgotten prophet? Well, here's why. The big thinkers of the day, especially a group called the Frankfurt School, had a very different take. They saw mass media as a tool for control, for manipulation. The idea that an audience could be empowered, active, they just couldn't get their heads around it. It was completely dismissed. Fattorello was just way too early.
So Fattorello's ideas just kind of sat there, gathering dust for decades. But then, fast forward about 50 years, the internet shows up, and suddenly it changes everything. The world was finally ready to understand what he'd been talking about all along.
Right around the 2000s, a media scholar, Henry Jenkins, he put a name to what everyone was seeing online. He called it participatory culture. He was describing a world where, thanks to all these new digital tools, people weren't just sitting back and consuming media anymore. Nope, they were actively creating it, sharing it, and, remixing it.
And this is where we get the term prosumer, which is, a mashup of producer and consumer. It's the perfect word for what we all do now, right? When you throw a video up on YouTube or write a review on Reddit, you're not just a consumer anymore, you're also a producer, creating content for everyone else.
Okay, so we've got our two main characters on the board. Fattorello, the forgotten guy from the 50s, and Jenkins, the modern scholar of the internet age. And this, my friends, is where the two stories collide. It's where it gets really interesting.
So let's ask the big question. What on earth does some dusty old theory from post-war Italy have to do with your TikTok feed? With all that chaotic, creative energy? Well, as you're about to see, the answer is pretty much everything.
Okay, just look at this. The parallels are just wild. Fattorello, back in the 50s, says the audience actively constructs information. Jenkins, in the 2000s, calls us prosumers who produce and consume. Fattorello talks about a co-constructor. Jenkins talks about an audience that interacts and remixes. It's literally the same idea, just separated by 50 years and a technological revolution. This guy basically dreamt up the internet prosumer before the internet was even a twinkle in someone's eye.
So we're living in Fattorello's predicted world. But what does that actually look like day to day? Well, it helps to break down our interactions into a few different levels.
You can think of it in 3 layers. At the most basic level, you've got reactive stuff. That's your simple likes, shares, comments, the everyday currency of social media. Then you step it up to co-creative interaction. This is where we're actually making things together, like building a Wikipedia page or doing a TikTok duet. And then there's the top level, algorithmic. This is the really smart stuff, where AI is personalizing everything just for you, like your Netflix recommendations or your Spotify Discover Weekly playlist.
And all this interactivity creates this really interesting push and pull. On one side, these tools can be amazing for local communities, right? Strengthening culture, giving people a voice. But on the other side, you've got these massive global platforms. You know who they are. That pretty much control the whole conversation. And that can lead to things like filter bubbles and misinformation. So we're kind of always stuck in the middle, navigating between these two huge forces.
All right, so we get it. We live in a participatory world. But what's next? Where does all this go from here?
Well, you can already see the future starting to take shape. Generative AI is completely changing how we make stuff. Business models are shifting away from just ads. Personalization is getting spookily good. The line between a pro creator and an influencer is basically disappearing. And of course, wrapped up in all of this are massive, massive ethical questions about AI and our data.
And that brings us to one last big, mind-bending question, one that brings us right back to our guy Fattorello. As AI starts creating more and more of the media we consume, who's the real author? Is it the human who types in the prompt? Is it the machine that spits out the result? Or is it us, the audience, the ones whose clicks, likes, shares, and comments have been training these AIs all along? It really seems like Fattorello was onto something. Looks like we're all part of the show now, and it's only going to get more interactive. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.